Hey, what's up, everybody? Today we'll be looking at another book in the popular neuroscience category, Livewired, The Inside Story of the Ever-Changing Brain by David Eagleman, neuroscientist, professor of neuroscience at Stanford University, and best-selling author. He's written 8 books, 7 of which are about the brain. And I just found out that Livewired was even nominated for a Pulitzer in 2020. Livewired was the third David Eagleman book I've read, and this will be the third positive review I've given his work, so let's get right into it. The main theme of this book is what Eagleman calls live wiring. A hardwired brain is this older idea that brains are relatively fixed and stable throughout life. Soft wiring is the idea that the brain is plastic and that brains can be changed or modified, and live wiring seems to me to be a more specific version of soft wiring. It's the idea that the human brain is the great evolutionary success that it is because essentially it comes out partially incomplete, and it's environmental stimuli that shapes it into whatever state it's currently in. And this process continues throughout the entire lifetime. You are constantly becoming you because the brain is always being conditioned, and neural firing patterns that define you, which are largely determined by whatever the brain and body are exposed to, never stop changing. Toward the end of the book, he lists the 7 principles of live wiring, which are 1. Reflect the world. Brains match themselves to their input. 2. Wrap around the inputs. Brains leverage whatever information streams in. 3. Drive any machinery. Brains learn to control whatever body plan they discover themselves inside of. 4. Retain what matters. Brains distribute their resources based on relevance. 5. Lock down stable information. Some parts of the brain are more flexible than others depending on the input. 6. Compete or die. Plasticity emerges from a struggle for survival of the parts of the system. And 7. Move toward the data. The brain builds an internal model of the world and adjusts whenever predictions are incorrect. So you can see it's another way of looking into the nature-nurture problem. Eagleman says, of course, DNA plays a big part in our brains and who we are, but environmental factors play critical roles in shaping our brain development from birth all the way up to an old age death. So there's a significant neuroplasticity angle, much like the last book I reviewed, but if I may say so, Livewired is neuroplasticity writing done better. This book takes a close look at the relationships between the body and the brain maps that form to create a cohesive unit that is you and your experience and your memories. By the principles of live wiring, whatever the body is or becomes, the brain's truly amazing ability is to figure that out and make it work. To use the body to feed the brain information about the world with which perceptions can be created. That could even mean creating new senses by plugging in a device. It's the same thing as the sense organs that we already have, and this brings up incredibly interesting ideas. If perceptions are so dependent on sense organs that pick up the stimuli, what other ways of perceiving the world could there be that we are simply ignorant of? Just like how a person who is born blind doesn't understand what they're missing, we don't tend to feel incomplete when we can't sense a magnetic field or see infrared. It comes back to this ethnocentric way of evaluating the world. All that we've ever known is all we've ever known, and it doesn't make it the truth for anyone but us. And even our truth is a tentative one. Did you ever think about what would the world be like if you had totally different ways of sensing? This is a fascinating issue that we've seen a number of times on this channel in books like An Immense World by Ed Yong and Sentient by Jackie Higgins and several others. But Eagleman brings up an interesting point I never considered, which is that we had to learn how to use our sense organs. The brain actually has to learn how to make sense of that incoming sensory data. When we're babies, it isn't as simple as ears provide hearing and eyes provide sight. He uses the installing of new prosthetic sensory systems that are connected to the brain to discuss this, and it's pretty interesting. Let's get to specific areas where David Eagleman excels in his writing. His books are very beginner friendly. I would recommend them to anyone who's curious about learning about the brain. But at the same time, even if you've read a bunch of these kinds of books already, I think you'll still enjoy his writing and get something out of it. Everything he writes about is interesting and relevant. Next, he's very good at describing where technologies could take us in the future while avoiding going off the deep end with speculations. He tends to stay in the realm of theoretical possibility with current and developing technologies. Also, I just think he's a really good writer. He's good at structuring his ideas and his deliveries so they're perfectly coherent and smooth. He's also quite gifted at metaphor, figuring out perfect analogies and how to use them to help explain his points. To do this so well requires the ability to accurately and cleverly see important links or similarities between concepts, and then thinking of a way to translate that into something that he knows that we'd already understand intimately. This is not a big book, but it's packed with fascinating information and concepts. If I haven't sold you on this book yet, I'll just list some of the other things that we see coming up in this book, and hopefully you'll be interested. The concept of use it or lose it pops up a lot in this book. There's a lot in here on learning and memory. It reminded me of Daniel Schachter's The Seven Sins of Memory, which was really good. Neural wiring, he describes how you can spend time learning a skill, building up those neural firing patterns, and if you go a really long time without using it, the patterns weaken, and he provides the neurological explanation why it's so much easier to relearn the skill later. On that note, he explains why, with dementia, people commonly revert back to childhood behavior and thinking. He goes over reward systems in the brain and the conversion of short-term memory into long-term memory. Talks about the constant battle of neuron growth and neuron die-off that's always taking place. And this die-off that I'm talking about is a good kind. If we didn't have it, then you'd remember every detail your senses pick up on. He talks a lot about how the brain is a prediction machine and a model creating machine, how the brain creates expectations and updates constantly based on the incoming information, how the brain is very good at ignoring irrelevant information. I really like the parts in here about how you can take a more active role in remembering the things that you want. A couple of things about the book I didn't love. A couple of his theories that he espouses sound really interesting and fairly compelling, but a couple of them I found questionable. For example, he provides a really intriguing theory of why we dream, and it makes sense, but it doesn't address the often emotional nature of dreams, and this is a crucial feature of dreaming that sleep scientists are trying to understand. His theory is really clever, but I'd recommend something like The Neuroscience of Sleep and Dreams by Pat McNamara for something like that. I love that book because he explains the different theories for things like dreaming and points out the strengths and weaknesses of each of them. But I digress. I also found his explanation for synesthesia lacking. It minimizes the phenomenon. He goes with the oldest explanation in the book for synesthesia, which is that it's essentially a product of associated memories. This doesn't address why it seems to be hereditary, and it doesn't address why it's so common in artists. In my mind, it doesn't explain synesthesia, it explains it away. Another thing I didn't like so much was the overuse of metaphors and analogies. Now, there's no denying his skill with metaphors. He's better with that than most other authors I've read, but he uses it a lot. You may find that you don't need every concept to be broken down for you in this way. Lastly, the parts on taking a more active role in improving your learning and memory, he missed out on an opportunity to tell us more about that. I was hoping he'd go deeper into how we could exploit an understanding of certain brain functions to our advantage, but he does give enough information where we should be able to use what he says. Really, each of these dislikes are pretty minor, and they don't even begin to tip the scales with the likes. I just thought it'd be good to include them. Okay, that's it for this one, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I enjoyed this book. It's something that I'd recommend whether you're a beginner or not. The human brain has been called the most sophisticated machine in the known universe, and Livewired provides a nice, easy to understand base of general information. If you're interested in learning more about the brain, definitely check out Livewired by David Eagleman.